Hello, all. This is the lecture for Chapter 9, Investigative Reports. So let's get right to it. An investigative report, you're going to have very specific criteria to define an investigative report. It can be something like an incident report, a trip report, a science lab report, or even forensic reports. Now, investigative reports, if you need a trip report, it can be something that you need to create after going on a specific visit to a company. We're going to talk about composing effective incident reports, effective science reports, and useful forensic reports. So incident reports, also called accident reports, they are going to be used to describe something unusual that has happened. It's going to be a single incident or a single occurrence. An incident report is going to give a precise description of what happened for your later record. You're going to be written carefully because they could possibly use as legal evidence going forward. So typical readers for your incident reports: anyone who's responsible for safety, anyone who may handle a situation after an accident or an incident, so maybe a head of company, a manager, or an oversight organization, such as an insurance company, if you want to think of it that way. Your incident report should include a few different sections. So first, you're going to start off with a summary of what happened. Then you're going to have a background section. This is going to be information leading up to the incident, especially if it's helpful. And then you're going to have a description. So your description is going to be your detailed section of what happened in a chronological order. That's the important part. So then you're going to answer those reporters' questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. You're going to be honest and objective. Remember, this is not a personal, you don't want to put feelings in this. This is just the facts. So you don't want to include any information that you're not going to be able to verify. You need to add a section called outcome, and this is going to be what the observable results were. Then finally, you're going to have a conclusion, and that's going to be what you've learned from the incident or the situation and what steps or measures can be taken to prevent this from happening again. Now, a trip report, on the other hand, this is going to tell people in your industry or even at your organization what happened during a business trip. You're going to give a condensed narrative of only your essential details and provide critical information that came out of the trip. For example, to-do lists or task list. Prepare for writing the report before you leave. Know before you even leave that you're going to have to write a report when you get back. This is going to help you take notes so that when you get back to write the report, you actually have the information that you need. You're only going to include information that whoever's reading it is going to find useful. So do a preview in the introduction, maybe a quick summary. Answer those 5 questions. Use headings for each section so that your reader can find the section that they need very quickly. And use bulleted lists for important events and things that were learned. At the end of your trip report, do you need a conclusion or recommendation? These sections are pretty much based on what happened during the actual trip. Conclusions are going to summarize the trip's benefits or its failures, and recommendations are going to suggest further activity. Report your events, activities in chronological order, and you want to use that active voice and first person. I did this. This is what went on during the trip. No, I performed this. I went and did this. This trip is basically about your personal experience. Next, science lab report, necessary for sharing knowledge. So the main purpose is to get that information out there and get it to your reader. 2 audiences: you can either have scientists or professionals, or you can have your faculty or your educators. So scientists or professionals, they're actually going to be interested in what you did, how you did it, what the conclusions were, and they're looking for information of what is the latest going on in their field. Now, faculty and educators, on the other hand, they are testing whether you understand the concept or the process that was supposed to be evaluated during that lab. Now, for a lab report, you do have to follow the scientific method that's going to dictate the structure and using inductive and deductive reasoning. Now, inductive reasoning goes from a particular observation to a general observation. So I sneeze around roses. That's facts. Therefore, I think roses make me sneeze. That's a conclusion. It's a general conclusion. Now, deductive reasoning goes from a general conclusion to a particular situation. I think roses make me sneeze. So therefore, I probably won't sneeze if I give my mother candy instead of flowers. Scientists are going to use both the inductive and deductive in lab reports. Now, they're going to use inductive to arrive at a tentative hypothesis. That's how you're going to figure out what your hypothesis might be. Then you're going to use the deductive to test that hypothesis. So the science report is the written record of the process of testing the validity of the hypothesis. Scientific method, that's going to give you and tell you to use precision, accuracy, objectivity, and carefully drawn conclusions based on the data that you have. When you write a lab report, always remember to answer the questions. What was the purpose? What did I use? What was the procedure? What were the results? And what could I conclude from what happened? Typically, science lab reports have 4 different parts: an introduction, a materials and methods. Sometimes it's called experimental section, methodology, procedures. You then always have a results. Sometimes it's called results, sometimes it's called results and discussion, sometimes it's called discussions, but you'll have a section where what happened in the actual experiment is posted. And then finally, you're going to have a conclusion or conclusions. Now, when you write a science lab report, use precision when describing the procedures. You want to make this section so that it can be easily repeated and it shows the validity of your experiment. Use the passive voice when describing procedure or methodology. Maintain objectivity by describing observable results without any personal bias or emotion. Remember, these are reporting the facts again. Separate observable results from conclusions that can be drawn. So you observe results, you draw the conclusions. Document sources and provide a reference list. Depending upon what your lab was about, you might need to include some additional sections. So you might have theory, instrumentation, calculations. You might even have appendices. Use straightforward language and do not omit any relevant data. You don't want to put extra data that was extraneous in there, but if you believe it was relevant at all, you want to make sure it was included. Now, forensic reports, forensics, that is what uses scientific principles and methodology to evaluate various kinds of evidence. When we talk about evidence, we can talk about handwriting and fingerprinting, blood, ballistics, tire treads. There's so much more. Forensic reports are investigative reports that analyze evidence, and this is really what sets it apart for legal purposes. Forensic reports adhere strictly to the scientific method. So we went from the least strict to the most. When you're writing a forensic report, you want to identify the expert's credentials, name, title, education, years of experience. This needs to be put at the beginning of the report, and more than likely it is going to be scrutinized in a court of law. Identify the specimens under investigation. Typically, they have evidence numbers or specimen numbers. And again, this is going to be torn apart in court. You want to organize the report as such with evidence. Describe the evidence collected, the method, describe the method or procedure used to test the evidence with graphics as needed. Finally, you have observation, state conclusions that can reasonably be drawn from the evidence. Sometimes this is called interpretation. This is going to be very similar to that results and conclusion section of the lab report. When you're writing your forensics reports, write using basic principles of scientific and technical communication, use specific and precise measurements and vocabulary, remain objective, focus on the process and the data, explain terms, provide quick definitions, and break down any complex processes into steps. Use headings and subheadings as necessary. Remember, your audience is going to find the specific section they want to read and read that. Provide references if you need them as you're using them in the text. Do not allow prejudice or bias to affect you. Remember, this is objective and you're stating facts. Rely on the evidence, not conjecture. If the evidence is incomplete, point out that it is insufficient. That is acceptable. So hopefully you've learned a lot more about writing investigative reports. As always, I'm available for questions through email, and I will see you next lecture.